Hi and welcome to another video. Happy New Year to all my subscribers. Sorry it's been a few weeks since I've posted a video. Had a few weeks off at Christmas, and then the week just gone I got knocked off my bike, so I've been nursing my wounds and so on. But anyway, I've had a request from Mike for this particular example on screen now, which is to do with the case entity. He's looking to have a custom field with a fee in a decimal value, and associated to the case will be this billing entity, this bill entity, and there'll be a row on that billing entity per user per case. So against the case there would be whatever users work on it. It'll total up the fees they enter onto the case form. If I show you what I've done so far, so within the case entity, obviously these are some of the cases I've done in previous solutions on previous videos. I've added this fee field, which is a decimal, and if I reopen that, related to the case is this bills entity. And if I create a new record, so all I've done is it's got a title, which is the primary field, which will populate in the plugin. The user, which will be populated by the initiating user of whoever edited the case record. Then a number of times the case has been worked on, and a total fee. And what Mike was looking for was obviously a single row per user against a particular case. So if they don't have an existing bill record, it will create a new one, and if there is an existing one, update that existing record, and obviously add to the fee and increment the number of times worked on. So if I minimize that, just close that case. So I'll open Visual Studio. I'm opening my CRM demo solution again. Hopefully the demos should be a little bit quicker because I've moved all of this to dedicated virtual machines at home rather than using my company's machines. So this is the solution you've seen in a lot of the previous videos, and what I'm going to do, which is a bit different to what you've previously seen, I had a few requests to use the developer toolkits add plugin option in the CRM Explorer rather than manually creating a class library and copying and pasting previous code and copying and pasting elements into the register file. I'm going to use the CRM Explorer to generate the class library, which inherits from this plugin base class, and obviously to do the steps and so on, and I'll show you how that modifies the register file and so on. So rather than doing the add new item and choosing class library, the way this will differ is if I open CRM Explorer, expand my organization, expand my plugin assemblies, and then expand plugins. Just refresh. So if I expand that again, so these are the previous plugins and various steps and so on. So what I'll do is I right click on the plugins solution or project, and we have this option for add plugin, which we haven't used before. If I click on that, it brings up a very similar looking dialog, except you've got this additional project plugins, and obviously that's targeting that particular project. So the entity in this case will be the case entity. I'll retrieve the available message types. We're going to want to do this on both a create and an update, because presumably if they create a brand new case and put a fee in, it also needs to acknowledge they've worked on the case once and potentially put the fee into the billing entity. So we'll start by doing the create. This is going to be quite important because I think there was a few questions raised over how you recognise the user who's modified the case. Well, obviously the person who saves the case will trigger an instance of the plugin, and it'll be in the context of their user account, so the calling user, and we can use that in the plugin execution context, and there'll be a user ID as well as an initiating user ID property. We're going to work pre-operation. The reason for that is there's a requirement that Mike had mentioned to, once they've updated the bill record with the new fee and incremented it, they wants to set that fee in the case back to null, so that any subsequent users, when they open the record, won't obviously see another person's fee value, which would cause potentially erroneous results in the bill. So if we do pre-operation, we can set that to null as part of the plugin, and it will then, when the form refreshes after the plugin's passed through the pipeline, the value will just be null again. If I OK that, and what that will do is generate a class library inheriting from this plugin base class. So and what that plugin base class does is it initializes various things that you've seen me do in code manually, like the organization service and the execution context, the tracing service, etc. And they're all properties of this. Let me just scroll down. So there's this property that passes into this method, execute pre-case create. This local context has various properties which are initialized as part of this base class. So you can see it extracts the plugin execution context from the service provider, initializes the tracing service, it initializes creates a service factory to generate the organization service, which gives you access to things like the update message and create message, etc. Also does a bit of error handling, checks on the registered events. So if I look back at the class library it's generated, in the constructor it's generated this registered events and called this add method, and you can see that the stage 20 is the pre-operation stage. It's obviously passing in the create method, the target entity, and then what that does, whenever this plugin's called, it will do various checks on it. It'll retrieve the registered events, and then it will, when it actually runs the execute method, here it runs this check to see if the registered stage and message name, etc. are valid, and if not, it will just return. Otherwise, it actually executes the this method, this execute pre-case create. And one other thing, you can see that it's used a sort of standard structure to the name. So because we registered it pre-operation on the case entity on the create method, that's what it's named the class library, which it does state here in the notes that you can register more events here, which we will be doing. We'll be registering an update as well. So the name can be a little bit misleading, which is why I typically have done it manually, but that was also the reasoning behind that, was to give you an understanding of the iPlugin interface that you need to initialize and the register files. You've seen it sort of manually altered, but obviously this does save you quite a bit of work using the developer toolkit. And obviously if I look at the register file, you can see if I scroll down, this section here has been added by the add plugin option on the CRM Explorer, has automatically added this section of XML where we were in the previous examples copying some of the XML and manually editing it, and that now in its basic state, so it's a plugin that does nothing at the moment. If I just close that base class, close the register file, so the actual code where it says this to do, implement your custom business logic here, that's where we'll need to actually put in our logic. But we're in a position now where we can register that. It'll be a plugin that does nothing, and it'll obviously be registered against the create message. So I'm going to deploy that and show you that it's present within CRM. So that's now deployed. So if I open my demo solution within CRM and I go to the plugin assemblies section and click on my demo.plugins assembly, we can now see this pre-case create. If I also click on SDK message processing steps, we can also see pre-case create. So against that case entity pre-operation, we've now got the create message registered. We also need to generate the update message step. So whereas it differs where it doesn't differ. I still use the CRM Explorer for the additional step. So now if I refresh that, it should read from the organization the additional plugin. So expand my organization, expand my plugin assemblies, expand plugins, and now we can see this pre-case create. If I click on that plugin, right click, I can add the additional update step. So primary entity again is the case entity, retrieves the available message types, scroll down to update. Again, we're going to call run in the context of the calling user so that we'll be able to update the relevant bill record. We'll do it again pre-operation. What you've previously seen me do is obviously reduce the triggering attributes to the specific attributes for the plugin. That's if you've watched some of my previous videos. In this instance, because the requirements from Mike are that it will update the count regardless of what they edit, I'll trigger it on all attributes, and obviously within the plugin we'll do some checks to see if the fee attribute's present as to whether we increment that value or not. But we will leave it on all attributes because they could obviously edit anything within the case record, so we need it to trigger the plugin regardless. I mean, it's not ideal because if they would say make a spelling mistake, hit save, realise their mistake, correct the spelling and hit save again, it's going to increment the number of times they've worked on the case. So it's not ideal just working on the update of the case, but that's what the request was to show, so that's what I'm going to do. So we don't need pre and post image in this instance, so I'll just OK. So we can see the additional step has been created, the pre-case update. If I open the register file, scroll down, we can see the additional step for the pre-case update. But what this won't have done is if I go back to the assembly, it hasn't added in the constructor the additional registered event. And if we don't register that, then the update, although it will register it in the in CRM, you'll see the SDK message processing step. The code that checks whether it's a valid registered event would just return from the plugin without running our custom code. So if we copy this line, paste it underneath, obviously it's still pre-operation, which is still stage 20. It's the same entity, the only difference is the message type, so I need to change that to update. Okay, I mean now I'll just quickly deploy again, and then I can show you that it's registered the additional step for us. Okay, so that's finished. If I go back to my solution and I refresh so it's still selected on SDK message processing steps. If I refresh, we see the additional update step for that plugin. So now we're ready to go to the section where it says to do implement your custom plugin business logic. I could leave that comment line in if I want, so you can refer back. So very similar to what we've done in previous examples where we manually set up all the execute methods and so on. We need to do some checks. We don't need to do checks on the message name or the entity, but we need to check for the in the local context parameter in the input parameters that it contains a target property and that it's of type entity. So we can do those checks. So if it's a bit longer winded in terms of the way you have to type out the checks, because of instead of having a single short variable name, obviously we've got to do properties of this local context. So when I do dot, you can see it's got this plugin execution context, where in previous examples, if I just quickly dive into one, you can see that the plugin execution context I've just called context, so it's a little bit of a shorter way of naming it than having to do plugin execute like local context.plugin execution context, but it's exactly the same otherwise. So we need to do the input parameters, see if it contains target, and if it's also of type input of type entity. Is entity. Then if it is, we'll set the late bound type to be equal to that. We'll cast that target property into a late bound type. So what I need to do up here, I'll do it after the to do, keep it a bit tidier to read it. So we can define a late bound type called entity, set it to null, and if these two checks, if the input parameter contains target and it's of type entity, then we can set that reference type to be the target property from the input parameters. So then we'll have the case that gets modified or created will be part of this, the input parameters. It'll be the target, and we'll obviously pass that into this entity late bound type. Otherwise we could say we want to exit the plugin, so we can just return as we've done in previous examples. Then what we can do is cast the late bound type to an early bound type. What I've already done is update my early bound class library using the CRM SVC util, which you can see here. So I've gone into the SDK bin folder and I've ran that CRM SVC util with the various parameters to create a new version of the early bound class library, purely because I've added additional fields. I've added a new entity called FSO_bill, and I've obviously added additional field to the case entity. So in order for the early bound type to have those properties, I need to regenerate that library. So I've done that, so now I can create an early bound type. So call it something like current case equals entity, and we can use the toEntity method, and it's a generic method, so it can take different types and convert to those. So now we'll have an early bound type with all. So if I just to show you, it has all of the properties. Otherwise, if it was late bound, we'd have to know that it had those various property names and so on, and what data types they are, which are, if you refer back to some of my earlier videos, that should all be explained in a bit more depth. So what I need to do now is actually query the bill entity for the existence of a record for this particular user in this particular case. I've had a request to do it via fetch XML, but time's against me because it's getting on for 11 PM now. I will show in another video. I mean, fetch is just merely a mean, it's just a different query type. So rather than doing a query expression, building the condition expressions and filter expressions, you can pass a fetch XML statement in. I'm going to use link because it's just a little bit easier to type out, it's quicker to type out, but they'll all do the same end result. It's just to try and query the bill entity where, so if I say var bill equals from B sorry, before I do that, I need to instantiate my organization service context that I define as part of my CRM SVC util output, which you've seen in other videos. So that gives you access to the early bound data sets for the link provider. So I can say my CRM demo context org context equals new demo context, and where it requires the organization service property, which we've previously called service in other videos, now it's part of this local context up here. So if I type that, you've got this organization service property. So it's effectively the same thing, it's just a slightly longer means of typing it out. Let me just put that back in so it tidies my code up. There we go. So from B, you can put what you like there. In org context, then it's the FSO bill set. So we're going to query this new entity where the before I can actually use the link, I need to put a using statement. So up here where we've got these three using statements, I need to add system.link, otherwise it'll be grumbling and it won't understand the link query we're constructing. So now it's not underlining that data set, and we should have the IntelliSense for the attributes. So if I start to type FSO, so we can search for where the user equals, so this is an entity reference, we need to do the ID of the user, and then in the local context, plugin execution context, we've got both an initiating user ID and a user ID property. Obviously, if you defined at the plugin level that it was running under a context of a particular user, the initiating user ID would be the person who saved the record or whatever the message type is that triggered it, but the user ID would be the what you've defined when you registered the plugin. So if you said it was to run under administrator, that's what your user ID property would be. So in our instance, because we're running in the context of the calling user, they'll both be the same. So I can choose either, to be honest. So I'll just say initiating user ID in this instance. So we're querying the bill set where the user ID is equal to the user who triggered the change of the case or the create or update of the case, and where the and where B, I've got caps lock on, B dot case equals, and this is obviously an entity reference, so we can say we've obviously cast our case that's been modified to this early bound type. We can say current case dot to entity reference, and then we want to retrieve all billing records, but obviously we expect there should only ever be one, and something will have gone horribly wrong if there are more than one. So I'm just going to surround it in parentheses and do a first or default, and what that will do is give me a single record if there's a result, which there should only be a single record. If not, I'll get bill will be set to null. So then I can do a check if bill is not equal to null. So if we get a record back, we want to update the existing record. So we can do a check if bill dot FSO total fee is not equal to null, because we need to increment now the total fee property attribute. If it's null and we try to add to it, it will throw an exception. So we need to check if it is null. If it's null, we need to set it to the value of the fee value within the case record. And if it's, sorry, before I do that, actually, I need to check if the record, the case that's actually created or updated, actually contains a fee value. So if current case dot FSO fee is not equal to null, then we need to do these checks. And that's right, because I've got bad syntax. It's not doing the formatting of the curly braces. So we've retrieved the bill records for the current user, current case. If it's not null, we then check if the case that we're currently processing has a fee value, and if it does, we need to obviously increment the bill record that's been retrieved with that value. So if it's not equal to null, then the FSO total fee we can add to the current value, which we can add on the current fee value that's been passed in. And obviously if the bill record, if there hasn't been a total fee added on yet and it's obviously null, then we can do an else and just set it for the first time. So again, total fee, but rather than adding to with the plus equals, we'll just set it to the value being passed in. And we also need to then set it to null. That was a requirement, so that once it's updated the billing record, it sets the current case fee value back to null. And because we're doing this pre-operation, by just modifying that attribute, then when it reaches stage 30, which is the main operation, it won't actually write it. So we've modified it on the form, hit save, the entity that gets passed in contains that fee value, which we've cast to an early bound type. We use that value here to actually increment the total or to set it to the total, but then we can set it back to null. So before it actually then reaches the point where it's written to the database, we've modified it back to nothing, or whatever you want to define null as. Probably looking at it up, it's probably cleaner to do that just outside the if and else, because this section will only process if there's a value been passed in as part of the case. Okay, so now we need to, outside of that, now we need to increment the field that was, if I just go back to it. So we've got the fee on there, and on the bill entity, we've got this number of times a case has been worked on. So we need to say the bill dot FSO number of times case worked on, and just increment it by 1, which is the shorthand is ++. So we've found an existing bill record, we've modified the fee if it's in the case record. If it's just another field that's been updated, we're not interested in touching the fee. We do want to always, in all instances, update the number of times it's been worked on, and now we need to actually update this bill record, and because we've used the link provider, we need to use the update object method of the organization service context. So org context update object, pass in our modified entity, and then we have to obviously to get the platform to write that back is actually do the save changes method. So that was if a record comes back from that query. Obviously, if it doesn't find a record for this user and for that case, we need to create a new bill record. So I can do an else, and then FSO bill, new bill equals new FSO bill. So if I look at a bill record again, we need to populate the title, the case, the user. We'll obviously set it for the first time because this is a new record. 2, number of times worked on, this will be 1 for the first time, and do similar checks if the case record has a fee value. So to begin with, I need to retrieve the name of the user. So as part of the title, what I was going to do was say the full name of the user, case fee for case, or fee for case, and the title of the case. So the primary field's actually populated. So if we do a new system user early band type, just call it user details, we can use the organization service retrieve method, and then there's 3 properties, one of which is the column set. And before I can obviously use column set, I need to put an additional using statement to the xrm.sdk.query namespace. That's for doing query expressions and so on, and obviously column sets are part of that. So back to our retrieve method. So it requires an entity name, and because we've got our early band type library here, I can actually say system user dot entity logical name. Otherwise you just put speech marks system user in lowercase. And then the GUID is, as we referenced back up here, this initiating user ID. That will be our GUID of our user. And in this instance, whereas before I've defined column sets and done a string array and limited the number, because we're only retrieving a single record for the user, I'm just going to say column set true, which retrieves all columns. And you notice it's all underlined and doesn't like it because this is an early bound type, and the retrieve method retrieves an entity late bound type. So if I, at the end of it, do a toEntity method and cast it to a system user type. So now we've got an early bound type with for user details, so we can extract the full name as part of our so if I just do a new line as part of our creation of this bill record. So now the new bill, we've got various properties to fill out. We need to do the title, so we can say user details dot full name, fee for case, and our case, and we can take the title for instance, or even title. So now we're going to have the name of our bill record, so it'll say the name of the user, fee for case, and then the name of the case. We need to do the case itself. So again, it's an entity reference, so we can take the current case early band type, use the toEntity reference method. We need to define the user, so we've used it in the title. We need to actually define the user, so we can say take our user details, which is a user early band type, and again use the toEntity reference method. Set our number of times case worked on to 1 because it's the first time it's been worked on. And now we can do a check to see if the current case fee value is not equal to null. And then we can set the same as we've done here. Obviously it'll be new bill, but so let me just paste over that. So yeah, if the case contains a fee value, then set our new bill records fee to equal that, and also want to set that fee back to null, and that'll get written in with the main database operation. And now we need to obviously create this record, but obviously where it differs, where we queried using the link provider here, and we use the update object as part of the organization service context, we can just use the standard organization service create method. So I can local context organization dot create, pass in our new bill early band type. That should complete the plugin really. Just very quickly recap. Don't want to obviously drag it out too long for you, because you've probably seen me recap a few times. So we set up our plugin, we've registered our 2 steps with our registered events, and it's obviously added the register file entries. We've done a check for the input parameters, defined a late band type, extracted the input parameter target if it exists and it's the right type, cast our current record from that entity to an early band type, initialized our organization service context, done a check for an existing bill record for the current user in the current case. If there is one, we update it, do a couple of sort of safety checks on the fee, increment the number of times it's been worked on and update it, and then accordingly, if it doesn't exist, we create a new one, set all the various properties, and then use the standard create method of the organization service. So I can now deploy that. So that's finished deploying, and obviously I had the register file open, so we've got our familiar warning. So now we can test it. We close that temporary record. So we go back to one of the cases. I can modify any of these. So if you look associated to any case, because we've got this relationship, there's no associated bill records. So if I just change the name and save that, it should load our plugin. Obviously we didn't put a fee in, so if I look, we've now got a bill record, sorry. So Steve Green fee for case washing machine blew up again, and it's put 1 as the value. It's associated to myself and the correct case. If I go back to the case, change the name back, save it, a bit quicker because it's cached the plugin, we can see it's updated to 2. Now if I put a fee of £100 in, save, go back to bill, it's put a total fee in. I could do multiple at once, so let's put £250 in. So again, update on any field, so it's going to trigger the update. It's now up to 4 and £350. So, and now we need to just test it. So if I run the browser as a different user, I've created a couple of dummy users. I can't remember what my domain's called now. Sorry about this, let me just check my domain. crmdeveloper.local, should know that. So I've just created one called user1, and then we're going to be running Internet Explorer under the context of this other user. So that should fire up a new browser, which will obviously be the default settings. It won't have been initialized. I've never logged in as that user before. So if I just copy that URL, so now I'm opening another copy of the browser, but you can see in the corner, rather than being myself, it's now in the context of user 1. So if I just maximize that so it's easier to see. If I go back to the service record, obviously none of the cases are owned by this user, so I'll just have to go to the active cases view. So we've got that record I'd just modified. So if I just put a fee in of £50 for user 1, obviously against this case we can already see the Steve Green record. I'm now going to put a £50 fee in for user 1. So now if we go back to the bills, we've got a bill for myself, which I hope they're going to pay, and user 1, one time £50 again. Change the name, obviously just considers it an update, and we've now got 2. We can bash another bill in for £75, and the bill's updated, so three instances, 125. Go back to mine again, I can stick another £500 bill in. So, oh, did that update correctly? Let me just refresh that. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I went to the back browser thinking it was mine. It was actually user 1. So, sorry about that. If I minimise that one, there I am. I'm on my browser again. So I wonder why that had gone. I thought the plugin had gone peculiar then. So yeah, if I put £1,000 bill in for myself, go back to the bills records, so yeah, there was the 500 added on that shouldn't have been. It's incremented to 5, and so hopefully that explains what Mike was looking for, and that was, I hope that has answered it correctly. And obviously probably won't be today now, it'll be tomorrow. I've had another request from Brian for another, well, I'll bring it up on screen. Sorry, I was struggling to load the image. Yeah, it's basically Brian asked about a survey with an account with these questions, so I'm going to do that one tomorrow night. It's going to be a little bit more complex, but anyway, thank you very much for watching again. Hope this helped a few people out, and I'll be back on tomorrow. Thanks again. Bye.